Real quick, before I bring up the next person, as you saw early in the video that Dad was in the Navy back in 1944 through 1946. Just so that you know, Dad was stationed at Great Lakes. He got to go home for lunch every day, and he also just played basketball. They were on the traveling U.S. Naval basketball team. So one of the great questions that I always wanted to ask Dad, well, how was it being in the war? And when he told me that he was able to go home for lunch, I knew that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. That's right. I'm going to bring up my brother Gordie to introduce our next speaker. He's one of his best friends and probably one of the greatest athletes to ever play at Joliet Catholic. Goose?
It is my great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine that I've known since first grade. He's a dear friend, been a family friend, and was a friend of my dad for 50 years. Mark Parker played football at Joliet Catholic in 73, 74, and in 75 he was captain and starting quarterback on the first state championship team. He then went on to Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Division III, played football, basketball, and baseball in college. Not bad. And he was an All-American baseball player. Please welcome Mark Parker.
Thank you very much. It's interesting in reading many of the things that have been written about Coach Gillespie in the last few weeks, certainly some of the things that were said this morning, that you hear a lot of things that are repeated. And I'm going to probably do the same thing, but that's the idea of the impact that Coach has had in the lives of so many. If I could just ask, I'm going to ask a couple of favors, but the first one, if you would just close your eyes, I'm going to talk about Coach's voice. And that video that we just saw is a perfect example, but what is the voice when you think with your eyes closed that you hear of Coach? As attested by the video we just saw, and for many of us, he could hold a room of thousands of his peers at bay, sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for the next word, just by his voice. Coach was not a yeller or a screamer, but he could get his point across very well. More importantly, it was a voice that for many of us sitting here and many of us that are not, that we understood as being something that we could hold on to. I had the good fortune over the years. The interesting thing about the 1975 football team is that was the first of many state champions. But the interesting fact about that is that state playoff football in Illinois was in its infancy at that time. So it was uncharted water. It started in 1974, and we got to the quarterfinals and had a good season. And obviously, there were a number of players coming back in the 75 season, and there was a great deal of interest and hope and potential, I guess. But that was still something that no one really knew much about. There were other state championships in other sports, but not in football. So that team had the good fortune of being the first of many that came after that. So it was still one of those things that no one really understood that much about. And I'll talk about a story of that just in a minute. But I'd like to, if possible, relive a few moments of Coach's voice and the things that his voice could do for all of us. I remember very well playing for Bob in basketball that his dad helped coach a little bit. And I was a freshman, and we had a morning practice. And it was the end of the practice. Most people were gone, and he kept a few of the people on the floor afterwards. And I was very fortunate to have grown up with the Gillespie family. So Coach Gillespie was not Coach Gillespie then. He was a person that I knew as Goose's dad. And he was trying to get us to do something, and I was kind of like, you're asking us to do what? He wanted us to be near midcourt and with 2 dribbles get all the way to the basket. And he was serious about it. So it was one of those things that the people, and if any of you were there, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but he kept imploring us, you could do this. In 2 dribbles, you could get to the basket from midcourt. And I kept thinking, there's no way, and we tried it a few times, and I can just hear his voice right now. dumb freshman as I was, come on, you could do it. And not just me, but the other people that were there. Now, honestly, it was never one of those Michael Jordan moments that I really did get to the basket with 2 dribbles. But he truly put in my head at that moment the idea that just keep trying, and to hear his voice helping you along. What is the voice that you hear from Coach Gillespie in your ear? Sophomore year, early in the football season. Mike Bank, are you here? Okay, sorry. I'm going to get us both. And there may be a few people who are in attendance right now that can attest to this moment in history of Joliet Catholic football. It was, again, very early in the season. I should not have been on the varsity team, but I was as a backup to an outstanding quarterback, Mark Lawless. Mike should have been on the varsity team as a center. One of the first scrimmages that we were involved with was, I mean, I could stand here right now as a 56-year-old middle-aged has-been getting, nervous about it. One of the first scrimmages that we were involved with, Mike and I went in, and we had trouble on the center quarterback exchange. Not like 1 fumble, probably not like 2. And as Coach Gillespie is so famous for his precision, he finally just lost it. Now, we were banished to the sidelines, Mike and I, to go through the quarterback-center exchange. And I don't know the exact words today, Banco, but I know the tone of his voice. And it was one of those that I was about ready to wet myself because we were just over there. And to this day, I'm going to finally admit to it, you were a bully because you hurt my hands when you centered the ball. I was not strong enough or tough enough to be able to take those center snaps. Finally, I think we got it down after a little bit, but I could just hear Coach Gillespie's, at that point in time, you've tested my patience here, Parker. So it was not Mike's fault, it was my fault all these years later. Coach, sorry about that. Later, a couple years later, during our senior year, we had one of those Saturday morning practices that everybody is kind of just dragging down in the pit. And it was a practice that was not going very well. And I think he had this, break to go get a drink or something like that. And all of a sudden, as Coach did so very well, he started talking about a movie. And I wish to this day that I could remember which movie it was, but I can't. But it started out with just a couple of people standing there because most of the players had kind of gone off to get a drink somewhere. And he was talking about, it was a kind of a Western, I guess, and there were these people that were standing around a river, and there was a guy's arm that had been cut off, and he was extending his middle finger, and they were going down the river, and they were kind of doing this to the people who were standing on the banks and whatnot. So all of a sudden, all the players are standing around now listening to him. And he is going kind of on and on for what seemed like an eternity. I imagine it was only a few minutes. And finally, everybody was kind of in a good mood. We had a tough practice up until that time, and everybody was in a good mood. And I will never to this day forget, when he was done, he winked at me. And in that voice, hearing it right now, let's get down to business. Went back to practice. One of those crazy, crazy things, thinking about this, but when I saw that wink of his eye, let's get back to practice, and everybody went back to doing their job. There were a couple of times, it was talked about this morning a little bit, during his years as an intramural director at Joliet Catholic, and he spent hours and hours and hours there. But some of those goofy team names that all the intramural teams came up with and whatnot, I can remember very well, and I'm going to ask some help from some people out there, listening to Coach Gillespie's voice. Who was it that he ran out of the gym during floor hockey for knocking somebody down? Who was that? That's what I thought. I thought, Brownie, are you here? I thought it was Kevin Brown, and I could hear Coach Gillespie's voice literally running him out of the gym and I don't know who the unlucky person was that Brownie ran into, but I can hear Coach Gillespie's voice running him out of the gym down the steps at Joliet Catholic. And again, just that voice echoing in the halls. Needless to say, he was not in a very good mood at that moment. I also remember a time in the fall of our senior year, we were out at the Stephen Tennis Center at the campus of St. Francis. There was intramural tennis, and we were out there talking about some different things and whatnot. And one of the topics that came up in our discussion was the idea of football. And I think we were in the middle of the season somewhere along the way, and he didn't really mention it quite often because, again, it was such a new thing to all of us, but the idea of, we just got to keep playing and whatnot, and hopefully we get into playoffs and whatnot. But he talked about some of the teams that never had that chance, that never had that opportunity, because obviously they played before the playoff system was implemented. And he just talked about the idea that those guys were great teams, great individuals, great memories of his. And I'm sure he's talked about that for years and years and years. The idea that some of those people never had a chance to show themselves on the gridiron in regards to playoff football. But again, one of those things, just I could see that he was always thinking. And all those teams that didn't have the chance that hopefully Hilltopper teams in the future would be able to participate in. I also remember very well during the late winter, early spring of 1976 at an intramural gathering where he and I were sitting. I can still see where we were sitting on top of the bleachers. When you walk into the Joliet Catholic gym, the old gym, immediately to the right, we were just sitting up on the top bleacher there. The bleachers were not out, but they were just up. And it was a tone of his voice that I honestly had never heard before. I think obviously there were some things going on in his life, especially in regards to Lewis College and whatnot. And all I did was listen, and he just talked about different things and whatnot. Never was very specific, and I didn't ask a lot of questions. But again, it was a tone of voice that I really, truly had never heard Coach use before. Because again, some things I'm sure in his life were kind of going through some tough times. And I'm sure a lot of us sitting in this room and looking around this school right now might not have been the same had not he made some decisions. And I can remember as I walked out that night away from him, I just said, Coach, if I can ever help in any way, please let me know. Here I was, a 17-year-old, teenage jack bean, is one of his great lines. But I can remember feeling like, what could I do to help him as much as he had helped me just in that short amount of time that I had been alive? And he wrote me a note just a couple days after that. All it did was say, thank you for being a friend. Again, here I was, a 17-year-old high school senior, not having any idea what was going to happen, but a man in my life that meant so much to me, and he was thanking me, which is pretty typical. I'll go through a few more things just over the years because obviously, as we all could, talk about so many different memories and things like that, but talking about his voice, as evidenced by the video, he was an amazing man to listen to talk. It didn't necessarily matter sometimes what he was talking about because his voice was just it just commanded such an attention. When he would see most of us, especially people like myself who may not be around Joliet or were not around Joliet, when he would see you from a distance, he would kind of start saying, Mark Parker. And it was like, Coach, don't make a big deal. Please don't make a big deal. But he would then like say that, he would say your name 2 or 3 times, then come to you, give you a hug, and then start talking to you. And as Ryan Quigley so eloquently wrote about in his tribute to Coach, and so many other people have identified as well, he would make me feel like I was the most important person in the world. For those 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it might be. I have said this in other times, having a chance to talk to people, especially in regards to Joliet Catholic history. When you're a teenage jack bean or an early 20-year-old young adult, and he was coaching us, we knew that he was important, but we just didn't quite understand the significance. As I have gotten older, he became more and more and more and more important to me. The understanding of what he did way back when, but even more so, the fact that he still cared. And I would have the good fortune of trying to call him every so often, just to hear that voice one more time. And I wanted him to be proud, I guess. Getting into education and coaching myself, certainly my father's influence as well as Coach Gillespie's couldn't have been any more significant in my eyes. And I can remember one of the things he said, again, thinking about going into college and wanting to get into education and coaching, he said, there's nothing greater than working with people, especially with kids. And he talked about the idea that you have such a great opportunity to do that. And he's certainly right about that. The last thing I would like to to say and identify in regards to hearing Coach Gillespie's voice. Not everybody had this opportunity. I honestly can't say what he might have said with his baseball teams, but one of the things he said was, when you have your team right before you go out on the field or the court, that's a wonderful moment as a coach, because you've worked so hard to get to that moment, whatever it might be. And when you have that chance, look in their eyes. You know, Mr. Kennedy talked about that, or excuse me, Mike talked about that, looking in the eyes of the St. Francis baseball players before that big game. He said that's a powerful, powerful moment, because you know you're right there together. He also said right after a contest was significant as well. Yes, the games are important, no doubt about that. But he said right after the contest, using football as an example, when your guys are bloody, sweaty, muddy, hopefully you've won, but even if you haven't, to get together with those guys because they've gone to battle for you. Very significant times, he said, as the life of a coach, those moments. And we used to get together in the old cavernous locker rooms of the stadium, knowing in just a few minutes you'd be going out on the field. And you would get your hands together in the pile in that moment. And if I just think, if I could ask you to take the hand of somebody next to you, our hands are in the pile right now. We're about ready to go out to battle. Many people have talked about it. The idea that we need to carry on what he has done for us. Pretty significant for all of us. I don't think there's any question about that. We need to carry that on. And it's a pretty simple manner. Think about how he's treated all of us. And the opportunity that we have still now to carry that on. Mr. Kennedy talked about that. We had our hands together, ready to go to battle. Our battle now is to go out every single day to try to carry on the things that Coach Gillespie provided for us. And some of you will know what I'm going to say, and I wish that I could hear the exact words coming from his mouth, but if I just listen close enough, listen to the voice that I need to hear from him. Our Lady Queen of Victory, pray for us. Pray for us. Thank you.